Okay, let's make a start. So, Alejandro, if you'd like to sit. And basically what's going to happen is the participants are going to present the exhibition moving around this way. The chairs will move around. You're going to make a first general description and then individually going around. And everybody else will have a chance to make comments as we have. So we have Professor Stanislaus von Moos here. We have Alejandro Lapunzina and Caroline. I don't know where she is, but there she is. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes. So, and Max, of course, if you're still here. Max, there you are. There you are. Right. So anybody who wants to make comments will chip in. And they're going to do one by one, and comments, not necessarily long comments on each one, but, choosing what to say. Okay. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the 2 weeks' work, just for those who didn't follow it. What we tried to do was to try to extract from Le Corbusier's writings, especially, certain themes, which are, to start with, the constituent themes of the modern movement. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, the idea of how you form your taste if you don't have professors in the School of Architecture to form it for you, how you create your own set of judgments, the question of the structural rationalism, the question of standardization, and then we contrasted that with various changes in Le Corbusier's attitudes after 1929, and especially the idea of the organic and the primitive, things that Mary just referred to in her lecture. And the idea was, the slogan of the fortnight was, nothing is transmissible but thought. So the task is to extract from Le Corbusier ideas with which you have created. And you have created in terms, of course, of the modern day. And so what we're going to see is a series of interpretations, sometimes quite distant, sometimes quite close, beginning with Corbusian ideas and sometimes buildings, but creating something new, creating something of interest to architects of today. And we're going to begin with a general introduction.
Hello, this is on. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this exhibition, which kind of concludes our fortnight for the Theory Masterclass at Spring 2024. And on behalf of Generation 34 of the Berlage, I will introduce the organization of the exhibition and how we will proceed with the presentations this afternoon. So when, as Tim just mentioned, we were exploring the contemporary relevance of Le Corbusier, and also along with reflections on the shifts of the spirit of the age, as we've been discussing in the seminars and throughout these projects here in the exhibition. So the exhibition, we organized it as an assemblage of 11 different reflections, each departing from a piece of evidence that comes from Le Corbusier, which you can find on top of the title tiles, the smaller images on top of the titles and the captions. The exhibition presents a mixture of interests, and it picks up on various ideas from Le Corbusier's life and work, ranging from writings, representations, semiotics, to architecture and architectural theory, construction, and spatial experiences. So we will go through each of them. They're loosely organized based on thematic topics, and then we will start from here to the other end. So we also kind of conceived the exhibition of without defining the media and format of the product. So here you can see a mixture of different media, and some are more traditional, that's printed, some are more engaged with newer technologies. So we will go around the exhibition in a pin-up mode, and we pair two projects together. So we will present, each of the projects will present 4 minutes, and then we will have 8 minutes for feedback. So we will start with the first one over here on the wall.
Hello, I'm Momo. In 1920, Corbusier with Onzefor and Dermy, they started L'Esprit Nouveau as a magazine. It was more like a seduction campaign to get people into the new thoughts of the age. So then there was this question, which was like, what will be the seduction campaign of today? How will it look like? So Starter is based upon a very similar idea of a seduction campaign. It's a platform for ideas, stage for satirical references, and a critical speculative reflection. As we see nowadays, we are constantly bombarded with massive amounts of media consumption, which often makes us feel insecure about our work and whether it's expressive enough to be presented in a finished form. However, there are many interesting and relevant ideas and informations that people have that are important to the zeitgeist of and the future of our society. We often become intimidated and envious of the power, position, and means of expression that others have, which makes it difficult for us to put out our ideas into the society. Throughout history, there have been many questions about the conditions and changes in our society that are still relevant today. As we continue to develop new techniques and technologies, we should continue to ask these questions about the conditions and the aesthetics of our society as well, and how the structure of ideas work in today's time of capitalistic mass media consumption. We often question, how can ideas be reflected in living situations and lifestyles of people in society? And there is this common anxiety of creating something and completing it has given rise to the value of the original content over the manipulation of a content, and creating something basic, experimental, and innovative. Starter here becomes a pluralist platform for exchanging ideas. Here, ideas and contents do not need to be profound, pure, or follow rationality and order. Architecture and design are like clear, empty glasses that can be filled with ideas and content like fine wine. Ideas are free to be shared with others, and collaborating with like-minded individuals can create something new and amplify narratives that have previously been excluded from the architecture community. Sharing ideas is a fast way to create something and make it happen, and let leave the anxiety of making it something finished to present to the world. Critical discourse can also be straightforward, spontaneous, and rooted in concrete facts while still being conceptually rigorous. Starter is a zine and a social media platform where people can freely submit ideas or snippets of their work, which can intrigue or depart an abstract speculative thinking to the global world. It focuses on speculating abstractions about the future and how we can create something new and exciting that can engage people playfully while keeping in mind the current problems that the world is facing. Above all, it questions the zeitgeist, explores alternative futures, challenges existing assumptions, and inspires critical reflection through satire and action. Also, it advocates for more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable future. So these are some kind of the references which are part of the magazine, which the magazine will talk about and kind of spread ideas around the people, like ideas which people have on a very basic level also, which can just go out and, it can further be developed by people, or it can be used for collaborating with people also. Also, there is this on a similar way, it's like a Starter has an Instagram page also with all the contents there. So these ideas which are there also here in the exhibition are kind of those ground ideas which can be done something about it. Like those ideas can be a ground for something to be happening ahead in the future, or maybe a thought that can be provoked for it as well. So, yeah. Is that? Thank you. Come.
No, for him, for the students, because...
Yes, I think don't hold it too close. Okay. Don't hold it too close.
Not too close.
Not too close.
Okay.
Any questions?
Elle a dit que c'est tout d'abord.
Do you want to go all around?
No, two at a time. Two at a time.
Yes, because there is a team that pairs, so we have one team of 3, so Momo will be the first one. You can give comments now, and then we will start with the pairs.
Okay.
Then we have to.
Okay. So, any questions for Mohil? I have one question. Your model is one which is like networking. So the idea is you reach people who are attracted by the ideas, which can be very different, and that can make things happen. And that makes an interesting comparison with the idea of Esprit Nouveau, which is one of funneling everybody together into a single idea. Have you thought about how that would work? I mean, how you build an audience if the audience is so dispersed?
In that case, what I had thought of it like the audience is not actually the audience are the creators also. The audience will be giving inputs, they'll create their own set of references, which will be out on the things, which will be out published. So there is no ownership or authority which controls the funneling of ideas. It's not funneling, because I think that's not how we see ideas today also, because like there are a lot of ideas, everyone has a lot of ideas. So it can be something which is kind of very pluralist form.
I think it's very interesting because it's a dramatically different zeitgeist to Esprit Nouveau.
Yeah. Just going on to that point, how then how can the format actually construct the discourse? So if the ideas are disparate, is there a relationship to format, trim size, the media itself? Or another way to say that is, if we think about Instagram and the phone camera, the grid, Twitter, 150 characters, those are all formats that basically provide a kind of pluralism of ideas, right? So how then does that actually, how do you think that actually constructs, that formatting can construct a discourse, a dialogue, or something, to use your words, shared?
I think it's more like that what we were thinking, that images are kind of an easy way out, like it can people can get it much more faster than words. Like sometimes if you have an article or something, but image is like a bit more powerful because it's fast also. So I think it's more based on image and also text as well, which supports the image. But the formatting is kind of, right now it's not really that much thought about, but I think it's kind of like what there was in the mind, that it's kind of a platform where it can be different formats of things also. It can be articles, it can be images, it can be visuals, audio, it can be variety of things which can be a part of it. So it's like a different platform, but this is, I think Instagram right now is used to just to show that how these are like the tiles of information have been like putting out, and we can easily talk about it.
One little question, a little bit on the same line of the formatting. Could you use the two formats? I mean, I see you have the digital format and then the printed format. Could you keep the two, or only have one of them? Because I think, and again, I'm not an expert on these things, but the format of the magazine, right, of the journal, that was also for subscribers. It was also intended for international distribution, right, at the time. Closer? Okay, sorry. And I don't know if today the printed format, which of course can be internationally distributed, right, is the best means for reaching an audience, a wide and vast audience. So at the time they didn't have the possibility of having a digital format. Could you exclude one of the two?
Yeah, I think it would be more of a digital format of what it is, but it can be like, digital format has some limitations to information, which the print format can support it too. And that again becomes like, if you subscribe to this magazine or something like that, you can have that detailed of like, extra content or content which is a bit in depth or more. But it's morely based on ideas. Like, I don't see it as a like very in-depth content, but it's more like ideas. If people have some ideas, it's just about ideas, a little bit small about it.
Another one? Just another one.
Yeah.
the title of the journal was quite suggestive, right? It was a new spirit, proposing something completely new, right? That was to replace, supposedly, an old order, right? What would be the ideas or the new order that this journal would propose in this new time, if that's what we are pointing to?
I think because it's like a kind of a speculative thing, it's the main idea of it is based around grounds of speculation. So I think the title here is like Starter, the Epoch Reflector. It's kind of, it reflects the ideas of the present and gives it out as a speculative, critical idea or something like that.
It's the question of how images and ideas, which are by words, how they in a way could be brought into your mind together. And so I was thinking about another way of how people want to talk about ideas is when they, in the Team 10 circles, when they came together, not to talk about ideas, but to talk about their work on certain themes. So the interesting thing is that the themes which were, let's say, ideas by words, could be checked in relation to, so the people who came together had many different ideas about a certain theme, and so by meeting together, they could discuss this, in fact, in relation to the plans. So there is and I think that's more difficult, let's say, with this world of, not the digital world, but the platforms of, I'm a complete other guy from a past, so how do you manage to do something like that in this system, so that you, at the same time, this combination of words, of thinking, and seeing images are one.
Yeah, but I don't see it as one, because like the whole idea was it's a pluralist format where like nothing needs to be one. Everything needs to be part of different things. It does not have to have a common ground.
It's really a different world. That's not,
Yes.
that's not how
Okay, for time's sake, we probably need to move on. And this time we will present in pairs. Okay, so my name is Shimon and my project is here on the wall. In the seminar, through the rereading of some of Le Corbusier's texts and also revisiting of his lectures, I became interested in the way how he presented his ideas in all different kind of formats. And I think that the writings and the lectures of Le Corbusier, among others from the early 20th century, kind of initiated the building of a modern architectural discourse that we have today. It's a framework in which we still perceive, produce, and disseminate architectural knowledge, and maybe not solely in an architectural sense, but also in the way how architecture is represented with ideas, if not affiliated with ideas. So here I created a matrix. It's kind of my fractional knowledge of the development of theory since the 20th century. And I started with the Futurist Manifesto, which kind of set a format guide for a lot of the things that come after. And I move on with some of Le Corbusier's lectures and text that he uses images as comparisons also to create some kind of shock for the audience, but also use that to make analogies between the past and now. And also in his architectural writing, he uses a lot of statements, like deductive statements, and these kind of arguments, which I still find them relevant in some of the architectural theory writings of today, that although they kind of break the idea to propose a grand narrative. They write in kind of a fragmented way, but still they present these kind of statements. So there is also images in this analysis, some of the views that are particularly framed to achieve certain purposes and a kind of suggest the way how you should read projects, how you should read nature. And as for the organization of the matrix, I'm starting from the 20th century and it goes down to the 21st century. And as we approach this side, it becomes a bit more physical. And if we go to that side, it becomes a bit more metaphysical. And if you're interested, I also prepared a guide. It's my interpretation of all of these tiles. But of course, because it's a matrix, you'll be able to, understand it in your own ways. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ivana. And in relation to continue on Siemens' analysis, nowadays in the digital age, everything seems possible due to globalization, social mixing, and the avalanche of information. Currently, access to information has no limit, which is mostly superficial or lacking of reflection. And on the other side, contemporary society rejects manifestos, understanding there is not a single global problem to be stated, nor a single truth, but many. Since the information is lightweight, it is difficult to use judgment, and only one truth is not accepted. So it is essential to recognize that, although cliché, understanding the past is vital for adopting significant positions or simply understanding how to produce architecture. And these 2 weeks that passed, I focused on how Le Corbusier outlined his work and how after trips, studies, lectures, and different ways of reflection, he wrote towards a new architecture and all his other texts, let's say, and how he used these collected images and text, such as, for example, the Fontainebleau postcards and other collections, and to return and reflect on them. In this way, he was able to construct and express his vision, his thoughts, and define his interests. So during these days, in our day-to-day review of theory and works done almost 100 years ago, I spent time identifying my interests and making decisions about what to write down, what images to keep, and what text to highlight. The activity made me reflect on how we build up thought and generate our own sensibility. So my goal was, in a very quick version, to develop a method that will allow me to collect my information, whether visual or text, and organize it into collections. Thus, I began to explore what content I had already decided was of interest to me, and to accumulate a variety of resources that would enrich, all of them, let's say. They have, this is an Excel file, so it's like an extraction of the Excel file, and it has some categories and also keywords, so maybe some information can be connected to another one. And I think that also the most important thing and the next step is what you actually do with the information, right? If the reflections in way of maybe produced projects of architecture or text or just discussions with other people. And as an example of this reflection is actually what I am saying and reading, that by collecting all this stuff, I managed to reflect on something else. And I also thought about, I think it's really important also to have sometimes the things printed if you need to go back to this information. And you can have 4 images or text in one A4 and collect them or note on top of it. And that's it.
Can I just make one observation just in relation to Moïl's thing, which is interesting, is that you've both focused on plurality. So I think what's very interesting here is the idea of knowledge and indeed arguments as a matrix or as a collection rather than as a linear thrust. And what I'd like to ask you is, I can see that very well as a way of rationalizing, actually it's a kind of theory of knowledge for a start, but also as a way of, as a practice for how you think about information and so forth, and preparing to use it in some way in your other work. But in terms of rhetoric, in other words, persuading others, is there a loss of direction and persuasiveness in this way of organizing data?
Yes, so yes, I think that is also one of the reasons why I choose to make a matrix. I think through the rereading of Le Corbusier's text, I start to realize that throughout, I mean, it's a personal example, but throughout my education, we've been reading a lot of the texts that started not to offer any kind of solution or direction in terms of practice, but it offers sort of an observation or this kind of I don't know, some loose arguments that you can kind of develop on top of. And I think that I was also making a reflection while making this, because towards the end I made a comment here, also asking myself if this is the way how we proceed with the theory. And actually, I present here two texts, kind of two opinions on this as well. I mean, even in the answer of this kind of question, there are multiple answers. So I have an extract from Mark Wigley, who claims that architecture is ever only discourse. It's about media, it's about how you present architecture knowledge. And whereas this article by Bruno Latour, he kind of argues for a direction to return to the physical aspects of architecture. And I think we still see that I mean, there are different practices based on these kind of thoughts, and I think you can find any kind of information following these kind of threads. I provided two examples here.
Yeah. So, living with contradiction.
Yes, exactly.
Good.
Sorry that why do I ask this? I'm trying to look. I'm wondering why are there those empty spaces? So what is the, normally this is a spreadsheet, isn't it?
Yes.
So in a spreadsheet, there are always categories here and categories there.
Yes.
So are there categories when you put these things together just intuitively, or are they just put together on association or something? I don't know.
The categories, yeah, there are categories like what I call the collections. Of course, this you can grab it another day and maybe think of other collections. So this of categorizing is not so easy also. But these colors are different categories, maybe things, I don't know, about archives from the place where I was born, or things we got from the master class, the images that I extracted and the relationship between them. And these empty spaces are because, I mean, it is an ongoing process, and also because, yeah, I mean, just to maybe erase some images from one part and recategorize them in another, I mean, yeah, in a more flexible way, let's say. I think the process of doing this also remind me of what we were talking when in one of the masterclass lecture that was about learning to see, and we said this of having a camera, an analogic camera, that you really need to choose what to photograph and what not to. And in this process of choosing what things to, yeah, put into the sheet, that is not like a super fast process, I also thought about that like as a filter, let's say.
So it's a kind of formation of place project.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So I have a question, but it could be for the commentary. Both of you provided a little something to the visitor, this and this, and how this could work on the visitor? Is it aware of this notion on transferable thoughts or knowledge, or is it something else, or is it a participatory attempt to interact? Or,
Honestly, in my case, is to explain myself and to show both formats. I really didn't thought about doing this as an extremely participative project, but I mean, it's a nice reflection.
Yeah, I think for me, originally the idea is to present just these extractions and the text and images by themselves. But as I just mentioned, that the matrix you can read in many different ways, and I thought of offering my interpretation in this sheets that you can kind of refer to. Of course, you can say it's nonsense and you can rip it. I was thinking that you can use it as a reference to read all this, but of course it's just as an aid or a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Just looking at the three projects that we've seen so far, including Momo's, it's all based on a sort of grid presentation. So relying on these squares of juxtaposing different types of content that somehow sit together, and there may be connections between the different aspects, there may be not. And my question is more about how you develop that other level of making connections between all of these things that then could lead to further generalizations and further productions of theory, for example. But that's not the real question that I want you to answer, because I had another thought, which was based on what you were saying about Corbusier going on these travels and collecting information and all sorts of different materials, bringing them back and then sorting them into different projects maybe, and then writing about them. But I think during those processes of collecting information, sorting information, organizing things, your mind also goes to other places. And I was wondering, the two of you, what did you learn during the collecting, organizing of your thoughts and this kind of material, not necessarily about this project or Corbusier? Maybe you had an insight into something else during this process.
Basically, the sheet you see here, it has only this about Le Corbusier, so I think that the insight was really to ask myself a question. First of all, what is it that I've been gathering? Because almost half of them were already on my computer or on books or as printed material. So I think it was a really personal way of understanding how to first deal with the information and really making this filter, and maybe do some connections between them, that some of them are super ephemeral, because it was also a really quick exercise. Yeah, mainly that.
Thank you. For me, I think originally I prepared this as a slideshow, so it was linear. And then when I start to conceive how to put it on the wall, I was thinking about this Derrida's glass, where he writes in 2 columns and he inserts all of his annotations in between. So that is when I try to organize also some of the texts that are related, that are written by me, that are related to these tiles, but I try to organize them kind of in a collage, or to say montage style, so that when you look at it, you look at all of them simultaneously, but you can still choose to jump to which tile to actually read. And I think for me it helps me in terms of organizing information, because a lot of times they are not only linearly connected, they're kind of a network of things. Of course, on top I could also add lines and stuff. I think it's kind of helpful to organize things in a grid style, maybe.
That it also talks about the contemporary situation of receiving a lot of information around us.
There is a connection, of course, with the art of memory. you know, the medieval system of trying to remember things by locating bits of text with parts of buildings. And so the idea of, and it's like Abi Warburg's Mnemosyne, I can never say it. Thank you. You say it again.
Mnemosyne, I'm sorry.
Mnemosyne, that's right, yeah. Where he made pin-ups of images and texts which went together, you know, him. So I think the visual organization of knowledge is very interesting, and I think that's one of the things you're working with.
Yes, just continuing on this thought, what I find interesting is, you know, thinking of L'Esprit Nouveau and your project, that you really take a totally different alley. I mean, Esprit Nouveau, in terms of its typography, is classical, conventional, is unoriginal, and actually plural also, in the sense that it doesn't define a particular message. It doesn't even encourage a particular message. It's this choice of illustrations that represent the so-called zeitgeist and that offer a certain kind of unity to the project, if there is such a thing as a project of L'Esprit Nouveau. In your case, since you speak of collage and montage, I'm surprised how specific your language of montage is, because it's not what you think of as a montage. It's more like a composition in the style of Vasarely, for instance, based on absolute symmetry. I mean, the whole composition is symmetrical, and the individual parts of it are absolutely symmetrical, and have an incredibly strong structure that I imagine conveys information on a certain level that is then not necessarily consonant or identical with what I draw from the information on the individual pieces. So I think what makes this a strong presence is the fact that it has a very strong physiognomy as a piece of black and white surface on a you know, yellowish wooden plank. So that's what makes it interesting, in confrontation, I think, with the Esprit Nouveau.
It's the opposite of unity in detail and chaos in the ensemble.
You're right.
You can move forward. Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Iyan, and here is my project. And my project is more like it's starting with like an experience I did for myself, because during these 2 weeks we were reading, discussing, and learning a lot of information from texts and lectures. And for me, it's like a process to recontextualize the Corbusier, but also our perception of him. And it reminds me of how back in my home country in Taiwan, we don't really understand this person and connect his contradictions before war and after war. And so here, what I tried to do was to contextualize his argument from towards an architecture with the materials from Eileen Gray and John Bedovici in their magazine when they were presenting the materials they used to presenting project E1027 to the public. And so here is the first section. Here I started with Le Corbusier's argument of plant. He said the plant is the generator, and then when I redraw the plan drawing of E1027, what I see and thinking about this plan is the generator. What I read is that on the drawing, the order and fullness is showing through the different value of different wall thickness, also with different, with lighter but much detailed lines depicting the building furniture. And so I try to think about the text from Le Corbusier and this plan together, what I think is plan is a generator, but it can be using order and thoughtfulness to ensure calm and intimacy, and and also in the text from E1027, they also said it is not only a matter of constructing beautiful arrangement of lines, but above all, it is for people to dwell. And for the second part here, I start with the drawing of elevation and with the argument of surface from Le Corbusier. So he said, architects are afraid of geometrical constituents. However, the great problems of construction must have a geometrical solution. And this drawing is from me, and I was using the way that I linger influenced by the style to draw 4 elevations, like unfolding a space. And then I find it interesting that this method is also drawing a kind of surfaces, but it's from the interior, drawing the surfaces of the interior. And what it triggers me to think it's actually about the materiality and the function of each surfaces, because some surfaces in the interior might be movable, but some are not. And some surfaces service the body, and some is served for the eye. And all it needs to be think through first, so the surface of the interior can be drawn. And the third part here, it's a perspective drawing, and I start with Le Corbusier's argument on airplanes. And for him, he says that the argument of airplane, I read it as it's talking about figuring out the question, and through geometry and technology, how human learns to work with nature. But this argument, there's a sentence here, it's the house is a machine for living in. And when I first knew it, or from my context, this argument, it's always just simplified to the last sentence, talking about house is the machine for living in. And the drawing I produce here, it's to draw my understanding from Gray and Badovich's description of E1027, the whole house. And then what I find interesting here is that it was only a little part of the house, but they use here this amount of words to describe almost every object that you will touch when sitting on this alcove. And so I think that this also could be describing a house as a machine for living in, but it used space economically, but thought about so many circumstances that people would use inside this very small space. And I want to reflect a little bit on why Le Corbusier this question mean to me, and I have a very loose hypothesis, is that I always think in Taiwan, I'm from Taiwan, and in Taiwan the industrialization was brought by the Japanese colonization, and so culturally speaking, I always think we don't have that embedded understanding of geometry and how it connects to aspected and rational thinking. But in Western background, I think in a way, you start with geometry, and then you have Newton, etc., and then you rationalize and utilize nature, and then you have industrialization. So for me, there's always a gap between what was spread as modern architecture and also Le Corbusier's thought and what we perceive outside the Western context. And not only for the general public, but also for architects, these ideas are constantly used as dogma, as things you just should follow. And so, and the gaps would exist between ideas and realization. So, and so what I find modern architecture in Taiwan sometimes is just the mix of Le Corbusier's and got turned into style, and it and also as a style is spread on housing projects a lot throughout 1950s to 70s in Taiwan, and it shapes our landscape through that time, and especially urban landscape. And it's always what I find questions a lot, and so this is why I try to read Le Corbusier's text, but with another kind of project, and to rethink about what if we knew modern architecture from an alternative approach.
Any questions before we go on to Sarah?
Yeah,
You'll do them together.
Group, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I will try to talk faster. So this is my response to Le Corbusier, and the name of it is Plots. And I started with that incredible idea of architectural promenade, which is deeply rooted in all Le Corbusier's works, I would say. And I perceive it a bit in a different way, because for me, it's not about the way how people perceive architecture afterwards, how they walk through it, but actually it's the way how you build up your architecture, how you create the plan and how you create the building itself. The structure of the text is simple. I think I tried to explain what the plot is for me and how you can define it. And basically, there are different types of plots. They could be linear, non-linear, dead end, not dead end, and circulars. There could be external, internal. There could be transitional. There are plots that are actually plot that consists many other plots, so what you can see over here. And I also tried to build that argument through different historical examples, and just to explain that Le Corbusier was not the first one and probably not the last one who's gonna use that method. And who was my reference? Number one, that was Pope Sixtus V in Rome, who made the reconstruction of Rome, and which is basically also connected to that idea of walking through buildings, because he tried to connect several main churches of Rome of that time with specific ways and passages, and also with number of obelisks and monuments. And I was very focused on that idea of obelisk, and because for me it's also somehow connected to the fact that the plot is not just, the plot is basically a sequence of events, and every event has its own specific structure, and I try to also show it over here. And with that idea of obelisk, I try to explain that every time when it's used in its specific context, it has its own meaning, and when you take it out, it changed that meaning completely, and it became somehow a fragment of the event that can be incorporated in a different plot. So basically, you can see here that I was talking about Piazza Navona, not Piazza Navona, but Piazza del Popolo, and which has the obelisk, which was taken from Egypt from 10th BC. And then it was placed in Circus on a spina, and then it was placed on Piazza del Popolo afterwards. So you can see that every time it has a different meaning, because before, I hope people do know that obelisk was never the one, but always two. It was always a pair, and it was a part of the portal, and that's why I say that it's more like a fragment of event, and then it changed its meaning extraordinary. And then I will try to kind of compare it and connect it to Le Corbusier, because in my opinion, he was the one who managed to link sacral and profane in a way that we still use it, because we know that it's connected to rituals and sacred spaces, but also some of those events and plots, they could be taken from everyday life and from vernacular architecture. And also, I think that we kind of need to thank him for that we created our own vocabulary in the way, using architectural elements and volumes not as something sacred in a way, but still keeping and having its own meaning. And I brought up two different examples. And for me, it also was fascinating the way how he worked, not with analogies to some specific spaces, but to with analogies to some specific, I don't know, events inside those plots. And those are basically that oculus, and which you can see over here for sure. Some people can say that, oh, he's seen oculus in Pantheon, but I'm not so sure that this has something to do with Pantheon, but that's for sure it has something to do with oculus. And the same about that dead end on the ground floor in Villa La Roche, which for me is also very important because it also emphasizes that it's not just one linear plot about the way how you climb the mountain, but a little bit different because the one was a dead end. Okay, I hope it was clear. If not, I think that text was written better the way how I talk. Thank you.
I can just like to look at the drawings closer because from here it's.
Could I just ask one thing about your plan here? Sorry, just one thing about this. Because this is the lower ground floor of the Eileen Gray house. But this and this are from the upper floor. This is from the upper ground floor, and this is the lower ground floor.
Taking a fragment.
You're taking. I know you're combining them together. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I see. I misread it. I thought this was the guest room below. No. Okay, still that space. Okay, good. And so that's your drawing from the top. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Who wants to?
Well, I have a very general question because I think your presentation had, in fact, your presentation had two components, if I understand correctly. One is a detailed reading and analysis of the plan of the villa in Roquebrune, and also considering the transition between style, quote unquote, of the pre-World War II period to a style or an understanding of what architecture and art is all about to the post-World War II period. And you are putting this in a relationship to this particular project, and I think you also refer to the painting that are part of the project as it stands now, although they are not visible on the plan. And then in the second part of your presentation, you projected this onto the general situation of your country dealing with the partly imported tradition of international modernism. And I think this second part, as much as I understand, is very interesting and in a certain sense adapts or could be proposed for any possible country, because there is no place specific on earth where modernism was born, despite the fact that there are certain figures who have made clearer and others made less clear statements about it. But there is this conflict between certain concepts of order based on rationality and industry on the one hand, and a multitude of popular traditions and sensibilities on the other, and a conflict between these two universes, I think is a universal dilemma. And I wonder if you can explain me how these two strategies that you used in your presentation combine. I mean, how do you make the step from the analysis of the Roquebrune project to your general understanding of the situation of modern architecture in Taiwan? Or do I simply misunderstand the fact that is it actually one and the same argument that you are
No, you
proposing?
understand correctly, but your question is, for me, it's a very huge one, that it's like a gap between these two components, and then I was also constantly thinking about how to connect them in a way, but I think for now I still don't have the answer. But I think when I was doing these drawings, for me it's very different. When I was drawing this one, for me it's drawing from the body, from how your body move in this place, and how you reach out to different things to while you're reading or while you are resting on this alcove. And I think the research or more analysis on body, and starting with body to understanding all these places that that modern architecture was imported before modern architecture was imported to study on body and to study on its culture and how the human body thinking or act to how to habitate on the place. It's what I think might be lead to a resistance when the import of modern architecture arrived. I'm not sure if I make sense to you.
Let me just make a footnote to what you say, because I think you helped me a lot when you pointed at the step that you made towards the view from above that highlights the body experience. Your other rather technical looking drawings do not visualize that body experience. But for instance, when we were looking at some of the pictures that we've seen yesterday in Juan Lapunzina's lecture, we were confronted, and also in some other Villa Cook in Boulogne-sur-Seine, for instance, where the drawings and the plans almost make inevitable your bodily kind of empathy with certain movements that the architecture suggests. So in a certain sense, you might come to finding a bridge between your two steps that you are envisioning by inserting a third project, like for instance Villa Cook in Boulogne, where in fact there is very visually present. I mean the engagement of the body as a challenge, as a purpose of building. Obviously, I mean, you have had 2 weeks. I mean, you cannot reinvent the world in 2 weeks. So I think you made an interesting step towards an explanation of modernity in the modern world. I mean,
cause the way I understood it was that you were comparing a kind of deep knowledge of a piece of architecture by inserting yourself into it, imagining yourself into it, and the stylistic passage of ideas in your country, in Taiwan, where there is not that deep understanding. It's a kind of superficial understanding of Le Corbusier's ideas. Was that one of the things you're thinking about?
Yes, but also not only the Corbusiers, but also broadly speaking, modern architecture, and also like plans and housing projects from Bruno Todd. We have a lot of reputation of that kind of plan and just spread on the urban places and replacing the original context.
Well, just a few little note on this. I think your drawings for me are much more eloquent because they talk about precisely Le Corbusier's understanding that architecture is about how we take possession and occupy space, right? And I would say, maybe it's a broad generalization and may have great experts here who are probably going to come after me, but that's what architects do, what great architects do. Modern or not, doesn't matter, right? And the examples that you talk about in Taiwan, right, of all these perhaps block buildings, they are not only in Taiwan, they are all over the world, right? And that's precisely because those who made them did not understand or did not look about how we occupy, use, and take possession of a space, but instead they distribute unrelated rooms where we are supposed to perform some functions, right? And that is perhaps where the failure is, in not seeing that the role of the architect is to understand space and how we use it and take possession and transform it with our everyday life, and not just as a mere replica of spaces that take you from one place to the other, which for me is the unfortunate simplification of the understanding of the idea of functionalism, right? That's.
Shall we move on to Sarah now? Yeah, no. But I think the way is to yeah, okay. No.
So, questions for Sarah?
Sarah, can you say a little bit more about your notion of plots and where it came from and what it means for you, like in your own practice? Maybe not so much in relation to the essay or this text that you've presented here, but because, yeah, does it relate to storytelling or is it about a journey through a building, or what or is it about the plot, like the spatial parcel that a building sits on?
I would say that if we talk about the notion, it's basically the same what you can get in literature or, I don't know, in theater. Basically, it's the same. But the way how I perceive it, I don't know. When I do plan, when I design, I don't really think about program or the way how people move from one point to another. But at the same time, I literally see different events, let's say, like different specific locuses or facts, like in Alderos's words, that helps me somehow to bricolage the building in a way. And through that process, I kind of understand and create something unique and the whole from different fragments. So that's why it's basically the way how I was talking about the plot, and I try to deconstruct it almost to the fragment when we do talk about even one key element that can be erected and also create the space around it. I think it also very important in the way that, in my opinion, every space has its own kind of value, length, and I don't know. It's not about the experience. It's something a little bit different, but I think it's just too complicated. I can't really answer it in 5 seconds. That's why I tried to write a text on that. I hope it was more or less clear, or not.
Yeah, do you want to go on? No, I mean, from talking to you, I understand something, which is this relationship between time-based and inherent. So you don't use the word promenade, because you don't want to think of this in terms of a linear succession.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's as if you compacted, like a cubist painting, all those different parts of the promenade into one thing. And the other thing that you said, which is probably in the text, but which you didn't mention, is the spiritual, which is interesting. So the idea that embedded in this kind of concentrated time motion are spiritual progressions. Do you want to say something about that?
I think that has something to do even with Le Corbusier's works and the way how he kind of managed to vanish that original sacred, religious meaning, not sacred, but religious meaning, because I think that what he did, he kept that formal organization and semiotics, let's say, of elements and volumes that helped him to create that specific feeling. And I think what yesterday we were talking about in your lecture, you were talking about in your lecture, I think it's basically the way how you build up that feeling through some spaces and with the usage and the help of some elements. I think this is it, basically.
I just would like to, it's about your drawing, like the Piazza del Popolo in Rome. There is a very interesting lecture by Jean-Louis Cohen, and actually in the book that the Berlage published on Jean-Louis Cohen, where he's talking about transference of ideas and the trident as an example of a form which appears in Rome, but in other cities in the world, like transference of ideas. It's not influence, but transference. And I really enjoy to hear him these ideas, and I will, you can look at this. But it's much more reaction with your form.
Shall we move on to the next?
We can move.
We're running a little bit late. Anyway,
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I will get
waters, yeah. Okay.
The closer, the better, because they're small things. Yes, hello. I am Lefkothea and Carlos. This is Carlos. And our project tries to examine the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the age of today, but primarily in design terms. Our departure point is the first version of Villa Bezot from 1928 of Le Corbusier. As it was an important moment for him as he transitioned from the floor plan design to sectional design, and it creates a very dynamic and interesting section. And there is also in this project a strong theme of climate adaptation, which is very relevant to today. And throughout the project, there was a very particular relationship formed between the client and Le Corbusier. So we selected two archival, pieces of evidence. One is the letter of Lucien Bezot, which is the client of the project, as part of his correspondence with Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret. And we crafted a response in the form of an email, which is this one. Speculating how architects would respond through today's lenses. And we also selected the section of the first version of the project. And we suggest an overlay of adaptations to today's needs and themes of today's spirit of the age, while still preserving the original design and structure.
Well, but so we try through this response first reflect on how he approached projects through the client relationship, through these couple of weeks, we saw how he, at the end of the day, even though he listened to the clients and their needs, at the end of the day, he took each project as a way to advance his theory in architecture. No? So as a reflection on that, and also as trying to take the client comments and respond to him in a way that he is heard, but at the same time, we pursue some of the ideas that were on the original Le Corbusier first proposal that will be relevant, that those ideas, if you transpose them into today's reality, will make a lot of sense. No? So we try to argue with today's arguments on how or of why some of those ideas could stay. For example, the client insisted to remove the double staircase and the double heights, or these differences in levels that Le Corbusier proposes in section, which at the end of the day end up entering the project. But we argue how, for example, the double staircase will today be an element that will permit a building to be more adaptable. No? So we try to argue as if today we will try to maintain that idea in the project through the lens of trying to make the building more adaptable, and in the something similar in arguing to maintain this difference in levels to allow the airflow and different possible interventions in the future, but at the same time taking into account things that he is concerned, like that are very particular to the site, which Le Corbusier was never there, and also in a reflection of this the modern movement aim of making a universal architecture, trying to take into account those comments that are very localized for the Tunisian context. No? And following a similar idea through an annotated section, as Lefkotea explained, we try to reflect also in Le Corbusier's principles of architecture in the period of the 1910s to the 1920s, and how this will be relevant or not today. No? For example, we reflect on how the flat roofs instead of the tilted roofs, if we bring them to today, it's a very all of these comments also reflecting of what we consider some of the spirits of the age of today, that we could say that could be the housing crisis, the energy crisis, and the influence and the constant advancement of technology. No? So through the flat roofs, we thought that today will be very useful because of the possibility of producing your energy in the house through solar panels. No? How the separation from structure from facade will also permit you to adapt new technologies to the facade through taking out the non-bearing facade and including different new technologies on the facade. Also, the double height that he uses constantly will allow to convert spaces as a single room to an apartment through a mezzanine that could expand the usable area, and to finish, also some of the things we could add to Le Corbusier project in this context was the add of some balconies that in the 2024, and with this idea that we are always looking for fresh air and not only staying inside as on the 1920s was a developing idea, could bring the house into a more contemporary context, no?
And as Carlos mentioned, basically also the overall idea of, instead of using this as one villa and one residence, the idea of turning it into apartments because of the separate levels, which gives the flexibility to convert them in individual spaces, and as well as the conversion of the ground floor to perhaps a more public function, as for example workspaces that could be for the residents or other people of the area. And also the extensions of the balconies work basically with the local climate. As it is a very hot climate, you need shading. And within the same context, there is another suggestion, which is a basic influence of the late technology, which is it's called an algae facade. I'm going to algae facade. Algae is basically an organism, a microorganism, and we will try to explain this to you. So we actually used, maybe you would like to come closer for this one, augmented reality to basically show the section of this facade and explain how it would work. So you can see here, this is the original document. So we constructed this section, which is how it works. How it works is that you have this, the green one, yes, is a plastic container that is filled with algae and water, and it's enclosed by glazed glass panels, and is supported by a steel framework. And you can see, well, if you can see here, there is a little tube that needs to be integrated in the roof in order to fill in the plastic containers with algae. And yes, basically you can, whenever you want, you can take it and see it and turn it around. And I will also explain a little bit how it works. This is a normal paper. It's all about the application. So how what this specific system offers is that it's a biotechnological system that works with solar radiation and absorbs carbon dioxide. And because algae is a microorganism that uses photosynthesis, so it absorbs the carbon dioxide and releases energy, which can then be converted into and used as a biofuel. So it's like the solar panels that they're converting the energy, but overall this is adjusted in a facade system that can provide shading. It filters the air, and it also generates energy. And generally, this system works like the trees that are regulated by regulating naturally the shading. That during the winter you have, because of the less sunlight, they are being reproduced less, so you have a more transparent facade, allowing the sun to come in, whereas during the summer they are being multiplied and being reproduced more, so they provide more shading. I think this is it.
Adaptation of a Corbusier building to modern thinking. Okay.
What happens on the main facade because of the big glass, we work on the section, but there is of course one elevation that is completely glazed and open, where you see the whole section. What happens that in relation to your, let's say, making it for the next century?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and that's why we kind of chose to only work on one section, because then if we would go on to, then we would have to design the plan, and it's a lot of work and careful work that needs to be applied, but it's the thinking that's in this sense that could possibly work with that facade as well. We worked on this one because we had the chance to use the southwest and then use protection for the sun, but I can imagine. Yeah, but there's more work to be done, so that's why we selected only this one and not expanded in everything.
Because this is a system of the water. So does the fuel disappear, or can you change the, because I know there are isolation glass panels where during a certain moment you can drop the fuel, but is there also a possibility that the fuel is restored?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Normally, in this case here, if like the tube is being filled from the ceiling, then there will be like another tube absorbing the fuel underneath and being stored in other containers to make the conversion of the energy somewhere else. It doesn't happen in place in that one. You have to transfer the yes.
But can you make it at one point completely transparent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm confused on the question.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I have arrived only yesterday to this workshop. So for me, this is a project that I find absolutely fascinating because it is so directly and empirically based on the dialogue with one specific situation and one specific architect, where the architect was given the situation also, but you have brought them together and submitted it to an examination which I think could have a model character, because I mean it is intriguing to think that the entire oeuvre of an architect like Le Corbusier, it doesn't necessarily be to Le Corbusier, could be submitted to this kind of examination by a sequence of hypothetical correspondences, for instance, because obviously the correspondence that has actually happened is also based on momentary, appreciations and emotions on the sides of both correspondents, and what in the end results from your agenda, from your program, is the fragment of a possibly systematic approach to these kinds of things. I think this is absolutely fascinating to think about such a possibility. And of course, I then wonder two things, as a matter of fact. In your specific case now, are you, what is your judgment that you give in the end to the project? I mean, does it make any sense in terms of contemporary convictions and possibilities as far as, for instance, environmental control is concerned? And the second question is, how would, if you were engaged to update the project so that it works in terms of contemporary imperatives, how would such a transformation, the result of such a transformation look? I mean, would it change the building entirely, or could it possibly be a way of allowing it to survive?
Do you want, or I can?
You start and maybe I can complement?
Yes. Yes, it will be brief because I think we have to move on as well. Yeah, I guess this is the reason also why we chose the project, because we saw the potential it could have in today's conditions. In terms of the sensitivity towards climate adaptation that he had during that time, which was a bit uncommon, is something that's very relevant to today, and something that we could develop even further throughout this project. And in terms of changing, let's say, its design, I think the whole idea of thinking through today's lens is about reuse and not this demolishing or like changing, but rather seeing what you can do with the material and the spaces that you have, rather than creating something completely new. So these are two things that we were thinking that are interesting and worth mentioning. And if you want to say more.
I just think that as a conclusion, what we thought is that through the principles which with this project was designed, makes it a building that could be very adaptable to meet today's condition with intervention, but it is possible without demolishing practically nothing essential, no?
Yeah, but the strength of your idea is the example rather than the specific. It's the theory, the idea,
exactly.
and not the Villa Bézot. I mean, it wasn't even. Okay, we must move on, I think, to the next.
No.
Just the image that you get, was it given or did you choose it? That's the only thing I want to know.
We chose it.
You chose it.
They chose that.
You chose that.
Thank you.
So we will present two projects now, and then we'll unfortunately have only one question for one time for each project, and then we'll do three in a row to kind of to wrap up the last projects. Okay, so The point of departure for this project here was the 1914 domino proposal, or well, rather a prototype, as a response to the deteriorated European landscape after World War I. And what was interesting for me in the first place was that it was a patent, so it was supposed to be a reproducible system that could be implemented to construct, well, as the name suggests, kind of series of housing. And then what triggered the project was that we discussed it didn't work really as an architectural solution for the problem. It had some issues that didn't really allow it to be used as intended. However, the idea of it became very powerful, and the idea is kind of the concept behind it, the new and different way of building, was that what affected really all the landscape of the 20th century architecture and can be found anywhere from slums of Cairo to rural Greece and so on. You see the structures everywhere now. So I will make kind of some key points and one key question. For me, the key question was, what is the direction to move in today? If this was something, let's say, revolutionary or something that really moved forward a practice at the time, what is it today? What could be kind of an alternative of it today? And to answer this, I kind of identified the key points of it, and to me the main feature was that it became a platform that would allow for flexibility, even as an idea, so that structure is separated from enclosure is liberated, and then there is kind of freedom of intervention architectonically. And kind of to come to nowadays, I was thinking, so if the bread and butter of modernism was industrialization, then today it must be digitalization. And my project, which well, I would call a trashy twin of the domino, is actually a game. It's a game that I invite you all to play, because I think that the idea of participation, that was actually, interestingly enough, mentioned in the lecture, kind of runs through the interest. And I think what used to be a very authored project, and also patent, I'm thinking now, what if architecture nowadays is much more about providing and designing the underlying concepts and the underlying rules, like such as the rules of the game, literally, and the rules of the software that runs the game, and then the user participation is through digital means to actually make something out of it. So as the analogy before was that people would literally go and make their walls whatever they wanted, and the structure was provided as a solution, here it's just a small kind of speculation on what if everybody as a user can use the digital space and basically make your own trashy domino. And my kind of conclusion is also that today I think it's much more important, rather than focusing on formal characteristics or kind of transmitting the formal characteristics of Le Corbusier and many other modern architects, it's much more important to think of the interface between architecture and the people who use architecture, even non-people. So it becomes much more about the audience and maybe bridging the gap of providing kind of what is the bridge between it. And this is one kind of simulation of what the gap could be, however funny or interesting or modifying. Thank you.
Moving on. My project is called a visual correspondence between an architect and an ordinary person, and the point of departure is the Cité Frugier project in Pessac, which presents kind of a duality, let's say, the before and after the interventions that occurred in on the site. And on a book by Philippe Boudon, yeah, he pointed out that actually the fact that they did the interventions was only possible because architecture allowed it to, the design gave a latitude to be done in that way. So for me, that I reached the question that if there is a relationship always between design and use, what is the role of design if the use is going to be subjective in the end? So for me, I think I was more interested in this process of design and how the dialogue between architect and an ordinary person, in quotes, because maybe it's not that ordinary. But what would be the outcome of it? And then I produced a quite interactive dialogue, which I sent an image, which is the point of departure, the PESAC project, and an ordinary person would respond it of how they envision that in terms of livability, and also concerning designing of houses, so housing. And I did a little Chinese whisper game with words. So each project and answer has a relation in terms of one of the terms that it could come out, or it could be interpreted in that. And then I'm not gonna cite all of the projects that I sent as a reference, but there's one side the architect and one side the ordinary person, which responds with quite, let's say, common references or daily life references that could be interpreted and could be the start of, or could be incorporated in the design process. And for me, it was really interesting to do this idea, because some of the things that I sent as quite conceptualized were answered in a kind of real way, I guess. And for me, I think my reflection is that sometimes architects in the design process, they are quite concerned about the drawing, the dimensions and the boundaries of the physical drawing, without even considering, or maybe considering, but not as the means of the project, considering this daily life or this livability. So I guess on a personal level, I think some of my references are still quite embedded in this idea of form, and maybe also coming from Brazil and having a bit of the modern architecture there as a reference in my practice. It was interesting to kind of step down of this position of the architect as the master, and understand these answers as maybe something that I can learn from.
Just on that, what you didn't quite explain there is that it's not just you and the ordinary person responding, but you responded to the ordinary person. So it's a zigzag thing. And I really like the idea of this as a discourse of images, the rhetoric of images, you know. And I think it's really worth looking at some of these examples. Aha.
It's my mother. Yeah.
Okay, questions for Misha?
It's not so easy to respond because to the first project, because we have heard another hypothesis a few hours ago when Mary spoke about the Mirondin houses as an alternative, as a post-1940 alternative to the domino type. And now you come with a third hypothesis. And in a sense, what is the paradox is that the digital revolution is one thing, and the images it produces, as far as I can judge, because I'm part of the digital society, of course, in many ways. I mean, the images that it produces and that we handle, that we manipulate, that we consume, and that we produce are fleeting things that disappear the very moment we send them off or receive them, whereas once they become architecture, it becomes extremely interesting. Visually, it's a very interesting object what we have here, but as far as I'm concerned, very difficult to consider as a hypothesis of a future architecture. So are images like this to be understood as frozen imagery, frozen into permanence, at least maybe for 20 years or 50 years, or are these actually appearances that would come and go as they do actually on the frame of the surface of a TV screen? Is this aiming at permanent objects, or is this a visualization of something that would be fleeting, coming and going?
To answer your question, no, it is not a visualization of a permanent object. And I think that's precisely what also my interest was, because I think I'm interested in departing from the idea of an image being aesthetic. So the image of this became so iconic because exactly it is an image that represents all the set of characteristics. But I think what I find interesting here is that it is about the constantly changing image. It doesn't have one static solution. So it is not to provide a formal answer or a structural answer to architecture, but it is to be able to have as many people as you need at a specific time to be able to interact with the design process. Or it couldn't be a thinking, it could be a very conceptual process to kind of look through all the options. So it is actually much more about the idea of authorship. So here you can provide the set of rules or create a game for people to actually author that. And I'm interested in someone like Momo before making this, and then somebody coming after and changing it. So I think it's kind of the departing from an image and dealing with the formal aspects is of course a necessary step for a physical world, but a later one somehow.
It's interesting because the image that you produce is almost like a circular building instead of a rectangular one, and it's probably because of a roof which is circular, and it's like a manege, or I don't know the word in English, the manege, like for a children carousel. Yes, yeah, and each time when you change the roof, we can have a different perspective of the buildings that you produce, but it's like a playful job.
But the question I have is, I want to understand it. Are you pointing at the replacement, stylistic or image-based replacement of the elements, or that framework of the domino, right, can be altered, adaptable?
I think it's much more on the conceptual level. I think I'm just using the framework of the domino, and I'm very interested in the idea surviving and completely kind of going beyond what was intended originally by Le Corbusier and being adapted in the society for completely different uses. So it is in a way here that all the objects are quite ridiculous, and they're not intended to kind of be thought of as an actual iteration of a domino as a building, but rather to like as a step to see if it's possible, kind of a hypothesis test, if a different type of interaction at the core of architectural practice can result in some interesting architecture. It is much more about how we think or how we practice the interaction between designers and clients and users.
Because I'm just very short, because I was thinking of Le Corbusier's project for the Plan Obus in Algiers, in which he plans a highway, and there is a drawing in which you have the whole structure of the highway, and he occupies the underside of the highway, and then he says the users can occupy the way they want. If they want to have a Moroccan style or international style or whatever style, they can fill in the space the way they want, right? So that's why I was wondering if it is about how you dress this sort of iconic structure, which is very flexible, or if it is about the replacement of the system, which is, for me, they are two different things.
Shortly to answer, I think a replacement of a system which would kind of alter the way you interact with it.
Just a comment, really, rather than a question. When I was looking at it, I was thinking, like you also said that this design was patented, I think, and that it was then replicated everywhere across the world in lots of different contexts. And I think that when I look at your project, it could also be read as a historical archive of different interpretations of that form, taken from different places, different ways people have adapted it already. And it's obviously pushed to an extreme, but it could be a historical project that you have presented here. But maybe moving on, because do we have time? Should we move to? Yeah. Working with your mom, which I would say is a real privilege. What surprised you in the conversation?
I mean, no, she's not. That's why it's an ordinary person, in quotes. But I know her taste, so some things are already expected. But I think it was nice to see, in some cases, having like really outside architectural references, how she would respond to it in a really simple way. And it made me think about how maybe an ordinary mind could work, and how I could relate with future clients or even friends. I mean, in this conversation, I guess. So I guess it comes to the really, base of the simple way of looking into things. And also in that book, it says that architects usually observe or see more than an ordinary person in their home, because they're concerned about living them, not looking at the things. So it made me think about how form and lines and alignments are not as important as actual use is, I think.
I just have a quick question. On this game with your mother, did you send her some kind of rules of regulation? Like, did she could send an image from far away, or did she have to stay in the house or around? Did you give her specific indication?
I sent her most about the topic of livability, and I said to her that she could imagine how people would pursue spaces that I would send. So that were the rules, but I said you could send one photo, you could send a sequence. But it was interesting that I kind of guided her in a way, because my references were mostly housing references, so she responded with that too. So yeah. She chose the image. Yeah, no, I didn't interfere.
Okay, we're gonna have to move on.
We have to move on now.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now we'll do 3 projects on a row. So I'll go, and then Effie, and then Andrea. So we'll just do back to back, and then we'll do feedback for all 3. So my name's Evan. My project's House is a Stage for Living In. It looks at Le Corbusier's concept of the house machine as a prototype for how the social production of space is constructed in a modernist vision of housing. I wanted to look at the interplay and boundaries of privacy versus social space 100 years ago and today, and how the cultural zeitgeist of each era constructs the social space in our ideas of home. So my piece of evidence is the parts from Le Corbusier's Passac, which is found in the mass housing chapter of Toward in Architecture, where I was interested in Le Corbusier, how he advocates for a sort of mass housing spirit following the post-industrialization and post-war Europe. So looking at Passac, I wanted to examine how Le Corbusier designs and sought to manipulate the social behaviors of the sort of complex for residents. so the sort of actual lived experiences of the residents in Pessac over time, which is detailed in Lived in Architecture, Le Corbusier's Pessac. Here, residents detail their sort of difficulties or what they really enjoyed about the sort of social setting in the complex or the neighborhood. And juxtaposing these two, I found it beneficial to understand the sort of gap between the architect and the actual user. And now, 100 years later, I wanted to think about how the contemporary conditions defined by the spirit of our current age and what the current spirit of the age is. So after brainstorming in the masterclass, I sort of came to a sort of consensus about how data collection and communication technology and deep learning machines like algorithms and sort of AI have kind of become this new construct in our daily social lives, and how these things are linked to a sort of anxiety about privacy and our information. So the machine of today becomes more like a stage is sort of my argument. So I consider and reflect in the sort of 12-piece matrix that I created how my daily private social life is ruled by this sort of contemporary technology that I'm defining as the spirit of the age. So I'm presenting in a sort of matrix format similar to the way Le Corbusier did and his sort of way in which he built taste in his personal and professional life. Which we've seen in a lot of his documentation of his travels and in other ways. And then also sort of resembles a sort of social media kind of timeline in a sense. So in each photo, I'm kind of going through the sort of ways in which technology or the sort of spirit or zeitgeist that I explained is intermediating in my sort of daily private but also social life. So, I mean, I won't run through each image, but I'll kind of explain, like, I sort of have kind of like the high-tech, let's say, machinery in my home, like my super unnecessarily high-tech washing machine that starts to become like this, I don't know, a bit unnecessary, let's say. But then also like things like Face ID or how I use Touch ID to get into my laptop and how my sort of data becomes floating into the strata and contributes to this like zeitgeist, as I said. And then just the ways in which also private and social are very blurred in my daily life. Or even just how I can be walking down the street, but then I can use a sort of device like headphones and suddenly I'm in a private space or private sort of setting, even though physically I'm, in a social space. So it's just running through the different ways in which I feel on a typical day, let's say. Yeah, now we'll go to Effie.
So my worry, let's say, after reading many drawings of multiple villas of Le Corbusier and in general the modern movement, I had this thought that we never really saw any specific places of the people that were working there and living there, and we were only focused on, let's say, the upper floors, because mainly the people, the services were living. There was, let's say, a rule that they were mainly living on the ground floor. There were not really a lot of archival material, so when we looked in books online or even in Tim's archive, we could not find any photos, any detailed drawings, any archival material to show how it felt to live on those spaces and exactly in comparison with the other spaces of the same house. So at first I tried to look at multiple of these villas and understand if there is a rule or if there is any repetition of how Le Corbusier would deal with these spaces, and especially in terms of lighting conditions, in terms of the entrances, if they were use the same entrance or smaller and side entrances to enter those spaces, the people in the service, and some other things like their connection with which function of the house and the relevance with the kitchen, for example. And then also because of this lack of any material that could help me understand those spaces, I took the Villa Savoie as the case study, and the only material that could actually help me were the plans with a very not really detailed organization of those two rooms, and very simple elevation. And what I produced, it's a thought, let's say a speculative render of that tiny space in the ground level of the maid, and it has exactly I tried to have the exact same quality of those photos that were taken in 1930s by Marius Gravot. He was the photographer, the official photographer, the first photographer of the project, and by visually contrasting them or just seeing them, I would like to question what this photo, this perspective render can tell us about the qualities of those spaces, if they are comparable, if they use the same design qualities as the general of the house, and how this class division in the same house could be perceived or enhanced or maintained through the design of those spaces. And also a question of why we cannot find any archival material of those spaces, and maybe why they are not, also they are not visible. Because I asked my friends who have visited the Villa Savoie, and I realized nobody had actually entered that specific room. There are no photos online. There are 10,000 photos of the Villa Savoie, and I could never understand what's going on there. And I had to even speculate that the window could not open just by seeing a photo of the exterior, and we tried to understand that most probably this window is not even open. Yes.
This is really fake. They call this fake now.
Yes, this is a constructed image of, it's a speculation of how this space could be. Thank you.
I will stand here. Hi. So I decided to focus on the impact of international design and standardization in cultural identities told in a family tradition. So the modern movement and standardization have significantly impacted cultures, shaping the way people live, work, and interact with their environment, aim to create uniformity and reproducibility from manufacturing to urban planning. While standardization has led to increased efficiency, affordability, and accessibility of goods and services, it has also contributed to the homogenization of cultural expressions and architectural styles. This blending of local traditions with modernist principles has sometimes led to a decrease of unique cultural identities. With the opportunity with a masterclass to reflect on the impact of modernism in our present, where the spirit of the time asks us to valorize tradition and uniqueness, I chose to focus on the evolution of the cooking space. Due that in Mexican cultural gastronomy is something super important, and by the way, I'm Mexican. So before modernism, the cooking areas were standardized, but they were standardized by region. The design corresponded to local and family traditions, to ingredients, and to resources, and also to recipes of area. Here we have a vernacular kitchen, which is the kitchen that used to be of one of my grandmas when she was, I think, like 18 years old, where you have an open space with an iron stove in the middle, where they use it to cook everything. The iron stove, as you know, has like an iron plate all over the place, so the place where they heat tortillas, it was all over the space. And they also used like big stone tools where they could move all around, and also tables and shelves, but the space was like super flexible and they could like move around whatever they needed to. During the modernist movement, kitchens underwent significant standardization, reflecting functionality and efficiency. Modular design created standardized units and cabinetry. The work triangle and built appliances introduced efficiency. Aesthetics and the use of new material eliminated ornamentation to ease cleaning. Quote, "The kitchen is the workshop of the house," Le Corbusier. Sorry? The workshop of the house, Le Corbusier. So he saw the kitchen as an essential functional space that needed to be designed with efficiency and practicality in mind. He was influenced by Benita Otte and Margaret Lihotzky with the Frankfurt kitchen. So my other grandma, she was older, but she was a city woman, housewife, had an American standardized kitchen, like the ones we almost see in Le Corbusier houses, with wooden cabinets and tile countertops. Really big space because my grandma had 9 sons, so yes. But yes, this was like my example of a modern kitchen when I was growing up. During the gap between modernism and nowadays, kitchens have been standardized even more, where my kitchen here in Delft could be like anywhere in the world. In order to question the relevance of tradition in modern society, and given that in Mexico, culture revolves around gastronomy, and where I have seen the evolution of my grandma's kitchens, this triptych tells the story of a traditional salt gordita recipe from the north of Mexico, a tradition that has been transformed in tandem with the standardization and internationalization of spaces. So here you will see a triptych of 3 different spaces with the same recipe on the side. This recipe is the gordita, and you will see like on the traditional recipe has like these long steps, while when you move to my grandma's mother's kitchen, the recipe is shortened by 90–80%. So this was like a change on space and functionality, and you have like almost the same product, of course, never the same, but it's the same aim. And in the third part of the triptych, you will see my kitchen here in Delft, where I took the traditional recipe and I edited as I will do it there. And you will see like notes of things. Also, I try to find the ingredients, and I mean, this is all part of the same internationalization. So, and also wondering how will I design my own kitchen if I would have the opportunity. And yes, you would also find the translations, because these ones are like original pictures. Translation. Yes, the translation of the recipe, because this is in Spanish, because it's the original thing. Yes, thank you.
What I like, yeah. All 3, very good, very good. What I like, Andrea, particularly about your thing is what you've done to kitchens is what Le Corbusier does to vernacular.